citizens in democracy? And if so, why is our democracy in such a sick state right now? Have we been too focused on workforce preparation and promoting the values of global capitalism to think that actually we need to teach people how to engage in democracy in our schools? That needs to be an important purpose of schools. So, I want to think about these things, and I just want to put that out there. And as you're looking at policies coming down, and Bud just mentioned HR 610. HR 610, pay attention to that. It's terrible. It's a terrible attack on public education. And if you look at it, it offends equity, accessibility, public governance, and public purpose all at once. Okay, so look out for these things coming down. There's so much noise right now, I'm worried that education is going to get lost in the shuffle, but this is a really, really critical issue. If we want to move forward, we need to pay attention to preserving public education. And we also need to know that what we had before isn't working either. Right. You know, our schools are not what was happening under Obama's administration was just as the inequities weren't getting solved, accessibility issues weren't getting solved. We have injustice in our schools now. We need to fight for more publicness in our schools as we move forward. So I'll leave it at that, and we can open up for questions.
So I have a question to get us started, but if anybody is burning with the desire to ask a question, I'm happy to let you get started. Okay, I'll just go ahead and start then. I'll warm you up. So this is a question that a number of people have asked, both for Congressman Dave Bratt's town hall, so online, and also it's been a discussion point that's been sort of circulating. So first, is it true that charter, private, and parochial schools are not required to follow federal guidelines to meet the needs of students with health and learning needs, or held to the same benchmark assessment standards? If the state or federal government provides a school voucher option, will those schools accepting vouchers have to meet current federal standards for students' needs and also for assessment? So I'm just going to open that up. And then after this, I hope you will present your questions.
All right, I'm going to start because this is in part a legal question, and so I'll just jump in as the resident lawyer on the table, on the panel. So charter schools are public schools. They are held to all of the federal civil rights laws and must comply with them. So that that's not debatable. Whether they actually comply is a question you can ask for all schools. Do they all comply with the civil rights laws? But charter schools are, in fact, public schools, and they are required to comply with them. Private and parochial schools are not required to comply with those laws. However, so I'll put it this way. Private and parochial schools that do not receive federal funds are not required to comply with the requirements that are attached to federal funds. So I should clarify it that way. However, there are prohibitions that do apply to them about discriminating on a variety of grounds that do apply to private and parochial schools, like discriminating on the basis of race, for example. So they are not sort of free from various discriminations, various laws that prohibit discrimination. However, if they don't receive federal funds, which many private and parochial schools don't, then they are exempt from many federal requirements that would cover civil rights issues. However, that is not true for charter schools.
Well, it's difficult really to know what the wording of the federal legislation is at this point. You don't know how wide open it is or how restrictive it is. I know that the experiment that Betsy DeVos ran in Michigan, where she had charter schools which were for-profit charter schools, had been a disaster for Michigan. So the question really comes in how many stipulations are in there. I know that as been stated, private schools, Betsy DeVos always touts the Ohio experiment called John Peterson Scholarship for kids who have disabilities to go to private schools. The problem is, they have to sign a waiver when they go into that program that they're not going to be restricted by IDEA at all. So they don't have to provide that. In most private schools, really the good ones in this area, they have a lot of good private schools in this area. And I had a discussion with my daughter about this just the other day. And she said, you know, when we have kids that have learning disabilities or need speech therapy, whatever, you know, I mean, what we have is we have a list of resources. As a parent, you know, here you can contact this person, or they can even come in after school. And, you know, my own 7-year-old granddaughter has some speech issues, and so, you know, my daughter's paying privately for those. So those are the things that I think a lot of folks who want to jump on the voucher bandwagon, and, you know, and also, if you look at tuition for private schools, I mean, these vouchers are not going to pay for, unless I'm sadly mistaken, you know, full tuition. So there are a lot of issues, I think, that need to be addressed with it.
If I can just add one thing about charters, is charters are very much a state, they vary state by state, and charters are set up by state law. And you know, there are a handful of states that don't have any charter law on the books at all. Virginia has a very restrictive charter law. That's why there's only like 4 or 5 charters in Virginia. In my estimation, that's a good thing, because it's really kept the charters that are in Virginia are very tied to the public systems and accountable to the public systems. But when state charter law starts to open up and it becomes more free market based, when there's more opportunity for privatization and sort of attacks on teachers unions and all these other things that might come along with charter legislation, then we need to start getting worried about whether, regardless of what federal law says, whether in practice they're actually achieving the goals that we would hope for. So.
And I think that's a really good point, because I think while we have our eye on the ball as far as federal legislation, we have a Republican General Assembly that's already in the background, looking at charter schools, looking at vouchers, looking at all those things. So you may have not only federal issues, but you may have state-driven issues as well.
Okay, our first question. Okay.
I'd like to bring up affordability of college. When my grandson just wants to go to college and fund himself, the problem was the cost of college plus the cost of interest to fund himself seemed unattainable to him. He couldn't figure out, if I do this, how will I ever pay this back? Because the program he's interested in is music, which is a very up and down business, so banks are not so wonderful about the interest rate that they might charge him. So I'm wondering if Virginia can develop a program that is more affordable and push back the time that it takes to pay for a loan to go to college. I'm not thinking free college, but certainly more like 2 or 3% for interest instead of higher amounts. Is there any program for that sort of thing available or on the horizon?
That is not my area of expertise. I mean, I probably know what you know in terms of what's been talked about. It's a huge problem though. Tuitions are rising, and higher education is in a real crunch right now. I mean, from working in higher ed, the funding is a huge problem. We're just introducing a new budget model at VCU that's, you know, we need to get more students in, tuitions need to go up, and it's, I don't see relief coming from the current administration, and so I'm not too optimistic about that currently, but it's definitely something we need to fight for, because it's not a sustainable model right now, and it's pricing out people, and it's not right.
This is
It's more just a piece of information and just an experience that I have a special needs son who is now obviously older adult, is doing quite well, but we looked into private schools up in Loudoun County when we were up in Northern Virginia, and the private school told us that they were only looking for a few good citizens, and obviously he wasn't one of them because he had special needs. The other thing I just want to ask the group as a whole, HR 610 is very important from what I understand. I don't know if anybody knows this. I believe it's still in committee. So we can't really get in touch with our congressmen like we're all writing postcards, but we can find out who's on the committee. So it's a way to kind of, maybe we can keep it from getting any farther, or at least being adjusted, so.
Back to the data on charter schools and their performance levels, I'm curious as to how, I can't understand how anyone can justify it. I understand the idea of giving parents choice, but if your choice means that you have to provide the transportation and you're a working parent, then that is no choice. So given the complexities of charter schools and vouchers and the fact that there is very, very little data showing that they're effective, why is this still a favorite of the right?
Good question.
Yeah, I'll speak a little bit to that. A couple things. One is the term charter school is a term that is a category that includes a lot of different types of schools, and so there's more variance within the category of charter. And so you can't just say charters versus traditional public schools, because charters are all over the place. And some of which have very progressive curriculums and are very accessible and equitable, and I think serve public purpose in ways that traditional public schools don't. Others which are terrible examples of privatization of public education and are about profit making, and which is a clue to why the right might be interested in it, because I think charters are a way to talk about choice and opportunity, but are also a way to kind of deregulate the system of education, which is one of the things that they like to do. So what I would say, I mean, my feeling, I have mixed feelings about charters. I do like the idea of innovation, that we need to do something different, because what we're doing isn't working, But we need to do that as we pay attention to issues of equity. So when charters open, for example, when Patrick Henry opened in Richmond, there was a big fight around whether Patrick Henry was going to provide transportation. And people stood up and said, you must provide transportation or you're not a true public school. And they did. They provide transportation for everybody. All the students that go to Patrick Henry get transportation from across the city, which isn't true of the open enrollment schools like Mary Mumford or Fox. Parents have to pay for that, so that excludes a lot of parents. So on that front, a charter school is actually more public than the traditional public school. So I think you have to look at it, you have to look at what types of schools are emerging under the law of charter, and whether they're actually fulfilling, like I said, the public, what we want out of a public school.
I would say that what I bring to this is that there needs to be more innovation, and there needs to be more leadership in public schools. I hate to say this, having been a career educator, we got a lot of lousy school administrators out there. In my career, I hired principals and assigned principals, and I used to tell them all the time, get out of the office and get around in the school. See what's happening in classrooms and provide supervision. We can do a lot of things in public schools. We don't have to set up a dual system to achieve equity. We can do it right in the public schools. We can do it with legislation. We can do it with some house cleaning. I hate to say that. But the revolution ought to start within the public schools, not extraneous to it. Because all it's going to do is leave disadvantaged kids sitting there with no more opportunities than they had before. In fact, less.
I'll just weigh on this briefly. So first, charter schools are not consistently a partisan issue. there are many, many Democrats that support charter schools. And so here's why, and it goes to exactly what my other panel said, which is we have a lot of room for improvement within our public schools. They have not been traditionally laboratories of innovation. And so what you saw is a need for families to have other ways to serve their children. And so charter schools are just one manifestation of that. And so I think charter schools can often be a target of, this is a terrible thing, it's taking money away from the traditional schools. But I think you also need to ask the question, why do you have families wanting to exit the public school? What is happening in our public schools that it's not a place where you don't need to, really encourage anyone to leave, where they're running out the door to do something else? And so I think that's the hard question that people aren't asking about charter schools. It's really, there are many ways to make sure that charter schools are held accountable, and they have, many strengths, many weaknesses. I agree that the label doesn't really tell you anything, but I think so often the focus on vouchers and charter schools loses the fact that where we need to focus our attention is on our broken system of public education, and we're not doing that. And my concern about this current debate about vouchers and charters in the bill that may or may not pass is that we're going to expend a lot of energy on that, and if we could expend that energy on improving our public schools, I think many, many more children will be helped by that.
I would just add that if you're a parent and you've got a first grader in a classroom of 28 kids versus taking your voucher and going somewhere where you've got 10 or 12, it is an economic choice. But so what we need to do is we need to lower per pupil ratios in critical classrooms where kids need additional resources.
Okay, we
That's
have a
what we need.
question right over here.
I was born a year after Brown v. Board of Education, and I went to Virginia Public Schools. I also went to segregated Virginia Public Schools. My high school integrated barely. I grew up in Fairfax County. My mother, a wise woman, used to say that the schools will never be desegregated until housing is desegregated. But given that that's a ways off, I'm wondering if there's any way to untie funding of schools from property taxes, because that's the reason why richer families have better schools. And if the funding stream could be completely untied from how much people make because of where they live, or where they live because of how much they make, it would seem to me to be able to go a long way to solving the equity problems that we've been talking
I
about.
want to speak briefly to that because that's always been a big problem with me in what's called, and you can weigh into this too, I'm sure, from your perspective, Virginia's ability to pay formula, which is made up of three components: real estate taxes, property taxes, and business class taxes. And the way that works is a school division, they're called divisions in Virginia rather than districts, but a school division gets state funding based on a composite index of those three variables. The formula is really not very equitable in a lot of ways. Many school divisions, like, for example, I'll speak from experience, Goochland County has a high population of folks who own horse farms, and have a lot of money and have good jobs and so forth and so on. And so what's left in the public school has to work within the formula, which is skewed because there really is very little business in Goochland, so it all comes from property taxes and real estate taxes. And so the state caps it at 80% of the factor, which means that the locality has to come up with 80% of the funds. So it's really a messed up formula that needs to be less driven from property taxes. I think it needs to be equity based on some state formula that is in fact equitable.
Can I interrupt real quick to say we only have a couple more minutes, so why don't we get to our final question?
I wanted to address this to Kimberly, and I think part of the answer has just come, but given our poor track record, not wanting to invest in the education of other people's children, are there states that provide good models? And also would like to hear your ideas about what you just now were sharing about taxes, of how we might invest and make that happen and for other people's children.
Sure. So I would say if you're looking for states that have equitable funding models, New Jersey is a really good place to look. So they have had some long protracted school finance litigation in which the state Supreme Court said you must re-examine the formula, state legislature, and ensure that the children in the state are provided the resources that they need to learn what's in the state standards. And you might think, aren't all states doing that? No, actually they're not. The state formulas are not closely tied to the cost of what it would take for all children to learn what is in state formulas. And so this often surprises people. It's like, what is it tied to? Well, often it is tied to property values. It's also tied to how much money do we have in the budget for education this year, and then they divide it up among the politicians